Much. I appreciate the warm welcome, and to my son Arjun too. This is our first day in the South Carolina Trail with him, and it's an honor to be here. So, thank you all for coming out. I want to make this more of a conversation than me preaching my thoughts at you. I get to talk about that all the time, but the special opportunity for me is actually better than doing TV interviews, better than talking to media. Is I've actually learned something from every one of these stops we've made in this state, without exception, and I think I will today too if we use our time for me to hear from you rather than the other way around. I'll tell you why I'm in this race, is that I think we're in the middle of a national identity crisis, okay? Faith, patriotism, hard work, family. These things have disappeared. That leaves a black hole in its wake. Okay, when you have a vacuum that runs that deep, that is when poison begins to fill the void. Pick your favorite one. It almost doesn't matter what it is. Racial wokeism, gender ideology, COVIDism, climatism. I would say abortionism is on that list as well. But what's the deeper root cause of that? Right? That's what we got to ask ourselves. And I think it's this hunger for purpose and meaning that we all have as Americans. I'm going to pass him along to my wife is with my older son in Colombia, but thank you. We'll see if he's tolerates this. He hadn't seen me in a few days, so we were spending some time together. We're doing it for his generation. I mean, it's really something about becoming a father changed my perspective. This wasn't what I was doing, by the way. I was a biotech CEO. One of the medicines that I worked on, studied biology. Biotech was my career. Probably the thing I'm most proud of in my life, actually, was working on a therapy that treats kids with a rare genetic disease. There's just 20 of them born every year. Not millions, not thousands, 20 of them. Where 100% of those kids die by the age of 3 with this genetic disease. They're born without a thymus. With treatment, 170% of those kids live lives of a normal duration. Working on that therapy was one of the great privileges of my career. That was my world. That is what I was doing. Until 2020. A couple things happened in 2020. The thing I talk about most is that actually there was a controversy that landed on the doorstep of the company that I was running, which was that it demanded that I make a statement in favor of Black Lives Matter after the death of George Floyd. For a number of reasons, I refused to do that because I can't say something that I don't believe in, even if that's the convenient thing to say. I couldn't, in good faith and good conscience, bring myself to do it. That led me to eventually step down as a biotech CEO to write the book Woke Inc. And then that led me on the journey that led to the doorstep of this presidential campaign. But the other thing that happened in 2020 was that I became a father. So we had my first son. And there's something about that that just changes your view on what matters. There's a lot of people developing medicines, and that's an important calling. But none of them was willing to say in public what many of them actually said in private, was that they disagreed with the woke cancer that was spreading across our country. So I made the decision to step aside and to focus on this new cultural cancer where the only way we were going to do it was to start talking openly again. And the thing that I saw was this hunger for purpose that I was talking about. I'm 37 years old. I'm a millennial. I'm the first millennial candidate ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican, actually. Thank you. I appreciate that. And the thing I'll tell you about my generation, about really every generation, certainly younger than me, is that we're all hungry for a cause. We're hungry for purpose and meaning and identity at a point in our history when the things that used to fill that sense of purpose, from faith to national identity to hard work, when those things have disappeared, that's what leaves that black hole in its wake. What I really see is we're like a bunch of blind bats, we Americans are right now. We're flying around. We're lost in a cave. We can't figure out where we really are. And like a bat, you can't see where you are. You send out signals that bounce off of something that is true. Then it comes back and tells me this is where I am. So we send out a signal that says, okay, it bounces off the two parents that brought me into this world, a mother and a father, and now maybe as a parent, the children that I bring into this world. That is something true, that is real. Bounces back, it tells me this is where I am. Bounces off my belief in a true God. I have faith in that God. That bounces back, tells me this is who I am. Send out a signal, I said, bounces off my belief that I'm a citizen of this nation, not some vague, nebulous, global citizen. I'm a citizen of this nation. That bounces back, tells me this is who I am. I work hard, I create something in the world, I'm proud of it. Bounces back, tells me this is where I am. What happens when those things disappear? Now we send out those signals, and then nothing comes back. We're lost in that cave. It's when the Israelites, they left the Pharaoh. They broke free of the Pharaoh. They were in the desert, but when they were lost in the desert, you know what they said? They said, that's when we want to go back and bend the knee. Okay, so we can criticize the Pharaoh all we want. What we really need to do in our movement is we need to take a long, hard look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what is it that makes us want to bend that knee? And you have a hole the size of God in your heart. God does not fill it. Something else will instead. You're going to bend the knee to something. Question is it going to be something true or is it going to be something artificial? That is what gives you wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, COVIDism, globalism, so on. It's not a coincidence that we see these things at the same time. These are symptoms of a deeper hunger. So what does it mean to be American? That's the question. That's what this presidential campaign is all about. It's not even a political campaign. I'm not a politician. It's a cultural campaign to answer what it means to be an American today. You ask people my age that question, you get a blank stare in response. That's a problem. We can fix it by reviving the ideals that set the country into motion. Ideals like meritocracy, that you get ahead in this country not in the color of your skin, but in the content of your character and your contributions. Thank you. That's why I said I would end affirmative action in America. That's something a U.S. president can do. I'll do it. It means you believe in the rule of law. That people like my parents, yes, they do get to come to this country if they follow the rules, come through the front door, pay their taxes. In that case, they actually raised 2 kids. Both my brother and I, both of us founded companies that helped thousands of Americans. They taught us that every decision in life you make involves a sacrifice. It's relevant to where we are today. Entering a marriage involves a sacrifice. You're giving something up. Having a child, bringing a child into this world involves some sacrifice. You're giving something up, but you can make those sacrifices if you know what you're sacrificing for. That's what my parents taught us. We should want more people like them coming to our country. But that means also unapologetically saying no to anyone whose first act of entering this country breaks the law, because that's what it means to be American. Right? It means that the people who we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government. Yes. Not some cancerous managerial bureaucracy, 3-letter bureaucracy that runs the show today, which is why I'm not going to make some promise telling you that I'm going to reform the administrative state. As much as I respect what my friend Donald Trump did, I'm not going to say I'm going to put a good person like Betsy DeVos, who's also a friend, to sit on top of the Department of Education. For an institution like that should have never existed, I'll tell you what I'm actually going to do. We're going to shut it down. Yeah. Should have never existed in the first place. You fix that problem, you go to that cancer. That's how you solve the problem. And by the way, not just them, the FBI to the IRS to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to the ATF, we'll go straight down the list. If it's a cancerous bureaucracy needs to be shut down, we'll get that job done. And by the way, if you put me there and I can't collect a paycheck from the federal government for more than 8 years, which I think is a good thing, then neither will any of the bureaucrats who report into me either. Term limits for the entire federal bureaucracy. Replace the civil service protections with 8-year limits. That's what it's going to take, actually, to get that job done. And then, I could go on for hours. I'm not going to do that, I promise you. but revive these pillars of American identity, right? Then we figure out who we are. Then we have the self-confidence to actually stand up to the real threats we face on the global stage. Top of the list for me, it's not in Ukraine, it's communist China. Right. Okay? We can declare independence from our enemy, from communist China. That's the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson would have signed if he were alive today. That is the Declaration of Independence that I will sign as our next president. Declare independence from our enemy. Thank you. That will involve, some of this stuff is actually pretty easy, believe it or not. Unshackle ourselves from this climate cult that's like a wet blanket on the American economy while letting China roam free, holding them accountable for the COVID-19 pandemic with every financial lever we have available. That stuff is basic. Okay, that's not hard. That's not even debatable. But I think we live in a moment where we need leadership. We need a president in this country that's willing to do the hard thing. To say that, yes, we might be more conveniently able to sell our land if we allow the CCP to buy it. But we'll say no to any affiliate of the CCP. You will not be buying land in this country using that as long-run economic leverage. We're not going to stand for it. We'll do the hard thing. If you're a business in this country, you're not going to expand into the Chinese market until the CCP reforms its behaviors. These things will involve some level of sacrifice, at least a willingness to make a sacrifice. But it's like my parents taught me. You can make that sacrifice if you know what you are sacrificing for. That is this thing we call America. And here's the secret at the heart of it. That's why you actually need an outsider to get this job done. Somebody who's actually, I've had the privilege of building multi-billion-dollar businesses in this country by the age of 37. I'll tell you something. It's true in geopolitics. It's true in any relationship, any business relationship or otherwise. It is when you are most willing to make a sacrifice that you won't actually have to make one at all. China's in a weaker spot than we are now. We just have to open our eyes and see it to actually have the conviction to do the hard thing. A little more Churchill, a little less Chamberlain. Think on the timescales of history rather than on the timescales of quarterly earnings reports or election cycles. That is what we need, and I think we can do it if we rediscover who we really are. We have celebrated our diversity and our differences so much in the last 10 years, 20 years. I grew up into it in this country. That we forgot all the ways we're really just the same as Americans, bound by a common set of ideals that set this country into motion 250 years ago. I believe deep in my bones those ideals still exist. I'm running for president to revive them for the reason we said it the very day one. It's on the bottom of every one of our coins. E pluribus unum, we say for a reason. From many, one. That's the dream that won the American Revolution. That's the dream that reunited us after the Civil War. That's the dream that won us 2 world wars and the Cold War. That's the dream that still gives hope to the free world. And if we can revive that dream over fractious group identity and grievance and victimhood, then nobody in the world, not a nation, not a corporation, not a virus is going to stop us. That is what American exceptionalism is all about. And that is what we will revive to save this great nation. Thank you all. God bless you. I'm looking forward to taking your questions. Let's have a conversation. And I want to, in the spirit of where we are, have a conversation about life and what role that plays in our national revival as well. Thank you. Please.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. When I watch you on TV, I long to hear you say something about the moderates, the Republican Party. We are so hungry for Republicans that will stand up for the values of this party and not buckle and compromise and sell out. I would love to hear you not call them out by name, but say the Republican Party has become literally Democrat light.
Yeah.
We need somebody. We're not going to make you a savior. You're never going to be our savior.
Yeah.
But you can call for whatever longevity you have in this race. You can change something in the Republican Party so we're not so stinking, disgustingly moderate. We can actually stand for something and do what this thing says. We can bring courage back to our land. And you're bringing it out of me, and I hope we can help you and help you with that.
I appreciate that. I'll say something. I'll say so much in there. First thing is, I think that one of the things we've got to break through in our culture, in our political culture, in our conservative movement, is that there is no political savior coming from on high. Okay, coming from the White House, Nobody's coming from on high from the White House in Washington, D.C. to save us. If we're going to be saved when it comes to our politics, it's going to be because we save ourselves. I think we need to actually graduate from the mentality that me or anybody else is coming from on high to do it. That isn't the way it works, okay? That's going to take every one of us playing and doing our part. Now, here's the thing with the Republican Party. I rarely call myself a Republican, to be honest with you. You may notice that. I call myself a conservative. I'm part of the America First movement that believes in putting America first and standing for pro-American values. The word Republican's almost lost its meaning, right? It's just a vehicle for advancing the America First agenda. Let's be really honest about that. But here's what I say, okay? I think that to put America first, we need to rediscover what America is. We've forgotten that as a country. And the way we get to national unity is not what many in the Republican Party will have you believe. It's not by compromise, actually. It's a siren song. They'll tell you got to compromise. We don't want a national divorce. So we have to make some compromises. I see it differently. I think we get to national unity by being uncompromising about the principles that unite us as Americans, okay? What actually binds us together? Let's be honest about this. Those principles I talked about, meritocracy, free speech, open debate, self-governance over aristocracy, the rule of law. These are radical ideas. There's no way around it. For most of human history, it was done the other way. In old world Europe, it was done the other way. These are radical ideas, but we embrace their radicalism. That is what makes America great. That is what makes America itself. And that is how we will unite this country. And my job in this, it's not just to stay in this race as long as we can. It's not even just to win. It is to do what Ronald Reagan was able to do for this country in 1980, leading us out of a national identity crisis. That's the opportunity ahead of us in 2024. You know what he didn't do? He didn't compromise on principle. He lived on principle. We got to tie the what to the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? And you know what? Then we're not heading to a national divorce. We're heading to a national revival. That's how we get there. Thank you. And it's not by being fearful, it's by being courageous. It's not just me being courageous, it's every one of you. When you find yourself in the room who's the only person who believes what you do me a favor, you stand up and you say it. You say it without apology, you say it without compromising on your principles. And my promise back to you is that almost every time you will find that you are not the only person in that room who believed what you did. That is what makes courage contagious in this country, and we're going to do it. Thank you, man. Appreciate that. Please.
Okay. You said that you were the first millennial to run for president. So somebody from
As a
that
Republican.
generation. Excuse me?
On the Republican ticket, yeah.
Oh yes, on the Republican ticket. So as somebody, I'm 15. So as someone who will be growing up and becoming an adult in the next few years, when I see the insane issues that we see today, which is just craziness with a lot of different issues, it looks very hopeless, and you see the downward spiral that society is going down. What are some issues, whether it be political or cultural, that you see as being an even bigger threat to the next generation that when you're president, you can stop?
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So thank you. Great question. And we're doing this for your generation, right? I think, like you're 15. I guess in my eyes, you're young in a good way. Our nation might just be a little young, actually. Going through our own version of adolescence. Figuring out who we really are as a country. Right? Sometimes some people will see us and see a nation in decline. That's not exactly what I see. I see a nation in its adolescence still going through our own identity crisis. So what are the threats that I think the adolescents in this country may face if we don't get that right? Put them in 3 categories that I think a president can fix, that I intend to fix, if you guys put me there. I think the first is the crippling economic debt and potential impending calamity. There's a way out of this. They'll hear you, they'll talk about tax increases versus spending cuts. There's a third way. It's almost like we've forgotten it. GDP growth, economic growth itself in the country. The 3 obstacles to that are A, the climate cult, which shackles the U.S. energy sector. Answer number 1 to growth is drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear. It's not that hard. Thank you. Second is put people back to work, actually. People have forgotten that work is a thing we do. There's a bill being debated in Congress now, which Joe Biden has labeled as extreme, which basically will require, in order to be the recipient of welfare benefits, that you are, if you're between the ages of 18 and 55, are able-bodied and childless, then in order to get longer than 3 months of welfare that you have to work for at least 20 hours a week. And they're calling that controversial today. We have an anti-work culture in our country that's caused laziness to spread like an epidemic. And I know I'm not supposed to say it that way, but it's just true. It's what's happening in the country. And then the third thing, which is a long story, which I won't go into here unless you really want me to, is reform of the Federal Reserve, which has been trying to play money god from on high, when in fact, we need to put it back in its place and just stabilize the dollar, which is something we haven't done. Those three things unleash economic growth. That's the first thing. The second thing is we want to make sure that your children's generation is not a bunch of Chinese serfs living on Chinese-owned land, working for companies co-opted by the CCP. We're going to fix that by declaring independence from China. And then the third thing is to make sure that you still live in a constitutional republic. Right? Today, it's this technocracy that's taken over the show, the fourth branch of government. What grade are you in?
I'll be going in 11th.
11th grade. How many branches of government do we have?
3.
3. Constitution says we have 3 branches. What are they?
Judicial, legislative, executive.
Good. Executive, legislative, judicial branches. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Kid who actually knows something about the separation of powers. It turns out you know more about it than most people governing in Washington, D.C., because they think there's 4. And the fourth one they believe is not accountable and is outside of the system of checks and balances. If I have one job in my domestic policy agenda, it is to shut down the fourth branch of government. If I have one job in my foreign policy, it's to declare independence from communist China. And we do both of those things, we automatically unleash the American economy to relieve and alleviate the debt burden that you would otherwise face if we don't grow. Those are the answers. I have a clear-eyed vision of doing it. Most voters in this country are from the generation before me. If you all put me there, I will get that job for his generation. That's what the next president has work cut out for him to do. That's how we do it as a country. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, and welcome to Spartanburg. And we're
Thank
so
you.
glad that you came to visit us and get to hear you talk and take our questions. I really like your analogy of using the bat and how when people are reaching out to hear some truth and to seek out truth, and they're not getting that truth coming back, especially with our education system and everything that's going on. How do you see that us moving forward and trying to bring back the education, from back in the days when I was going to school, for my grandchildren to, be able to grow up in a safe environment with education that they are getting the truth and not some, political agenda pushed upon them?
So I actually while we were in South Carolina just a couple days ago, I had the opportunity to visit the Charter Institute, which is opening up a new school. We had a $50 million project, really impressive, a little bit outside of Columbia. And it was a good example of a school that they're literally putting George Washington kneeling during the American Revolution at the entrance of every school. Civic education woven in. People being taught, kids learning what our history actually was, learning to be proud of our history rather than to be ashamed of it. We have a 25% recruitment gap in the military last year. Ask yourself why. Kids don't want to serve a country that they were taught to hate. So I think part of this is we're going to have to think tactical. Part of it, we're going to have to think big. On the tactical part, shutting down the Department of Education is the starting point. Take that $83 billion. For a quarter of it, we could actually put 3 armed security guards in every school across the country. The remaining 75% more than funds supposedly underfunded school choice programs across the country. School choice is not some panacea. It's just a starting point. We have to actually also then make sure we unshackle public schools who are burdened and saddled with teachers' unions. We actually behave as though our public schools serve teachers' unions rather than serving kids. And then we bring civic education in. I worry about civic education if it was just a monopoly through public schools, because that lends itself to woke capture. But if you actually have choice, parental transparency, part of what I say is if you teach it in the classroom, you've got to put it online. I have yet to hear a good argument against putting cameras in school classrooms as well. Combine total transparency with school choice, with shutting down the Department of Education, now you've actually planted the seeds for civic education to actually begin to thrive. Because if someone goes in a toxic direction, parents have the ability to see it and they're financially equipped to have choice. That's the tactical stuff in the fabric of education. That's just the starting point. I think the civic revival in this country is going to demand more of us. I'm going to break a cardinal sin in political campaigning here, which is that I'm going to share you with an idea that I'm mulling. It's not yet part of my presidential platform. I'll be honest with you, I'm thinking about it. Well, whatever it is, if it's this or something else, we're going to have to think big. about reviving civic pride in our country, one of the ideas I'm weighing, something pretty radical actually. I'm weighing a constitutional amendment, supporting one, that would take the voting age in our country from 18 to 25, but would say you still get to vote at 18 if, at the very least, you either have performed some civic service to the country, or at the least, you pass the same civics exam that somebody has to pass as an immigrant to become a citizen. Answering basic questions. Who are the authors of the Federalist Papers? How many amendments are there in the Constitution? Whatever it is, we're going to have to think big to get there. I'm actually useful for me to hear your guys' reaction to that. You didn't uproar and some protest over this, because these are issues you're not supposed to touch. If you actually like what you're hearing, that's great to hear from me, because we're going to have to think big. These aren't even Democrat or Republican ideas. These are fundamentally American ideas, fundamental to our revival. It's a discussion. We've got to be able to talk in the open, or we're never going to get to those right answers. And I think that this is where we go further in our movement. I don't even call it the Republican movement. The Republican Party bores me. You see me on given day. I'm no big fan of Ron and McDaniel, but that's a small point. Those things are boring. Who cares? That stuff doesn't matter. I care about the revival of the ideals that we're supposed to represent. If we want to do that, we're going to go further if we do it not just based on vengeance and grievance. We're going to do it because we do it based on first principles and moral authority. I'll tell you something about this. It was baked into your first question. I appreciate that. But just take off all the shackles. Okay, you can have the Democratic Party, Joe Biden will put us in chains, to use his impression. But don't be anybody's. Don't be imprisoned by anybody's shackles. Okay, the America First movement that we're in here today, I'll tell you, it does not belong to one man. It doesn't belong to Donald Trump. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to you. It belongs to the people of this country. Wasn't born in 2016. Wasn't born in 1980. It was born in 1776. We live in a 1776 moment in this country. We have to think about those basics. Not 2023 boring Republicans versus Democrats. Half the time I can't tell the difference between the two anyway. It's about reviving the ideals that the nation was founded on. This is our moment to have that conversation. And whatever it is, if we're going to revive that civic lifeblood for this young man's generation, for my son's generation, it's going to be because we're actually unshackling ourselves from everything they will give us, from the media to our own two political parties, to think big in our moment. And we're going to have the courage to actually do it. So thank you for that question. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, I was wondering, we're so reliant on China for imports. And,
We are.
I was wondering, and the trade balance is out of this world. I was wondering what you think we can do in order to decouple ourselves from China to improve our economic situation here in this country.
Well, since you're asking it specifically, I'll give you a couple more specifics beyond what I gave before, okay? So it's not as difficult as they make it out to be. Because if you say whatever we do in China, we have to bring immediately over to the US, that's a big leap. But if we're willing to say that our goal is to actually decouple from our enemy, which I think is a big objective. I mean, even I use Ronald Reagan, but the job of the next president, if you put me there, my job will be more difficult than Ronald Reagan's, because the USSR never put the shoes on our feet or the phones in our pockets. This is a much more difficult challenge. If that had been a Russian spy balloon flying over the United States, you know what we would have done? We would have shot it down and ratcheted up sanctions. Because the reason we didn't do it for China is because we know we're dependent on them for our modern way of life. Okay, so how do we actually decouple from China? The first step is protecting ourselves from the way they're infiltrating. China knows we're addicted to them. Let's just take the fentanyl crisis in this country. Okay, we have 50,000 people a year, 200 people a day dying in this country of Chinese, mostly Chinese manufactured fentanyl from, I'm not kidding, Wuhan, coming to Mexican drug cartels pumped across our southern border. I have said that I would use the U.S. military, instead of using it to secure somebody else's border and God knows where, I will use it to secure our own southern border and to annihilate the Mexican drug cartels if necessary. That is morally, legally, and ethically justified. And we will solve that problem. That's part of declaring independence from China, because they view this as a modern opium war, undermining the United States from within. But I think that going the distance involves sitting across the table from Xi Jinping and having the spine to say that, you know what? If you don't stop the practices of data theft, intellectual property theft, turning our companies into lobbying operations here at home, then we're out. We will ban US businesses from expanding into the Chinese market unless and until you do it. I think that there's a very good chance he buckles. But if he doesn't, then we're going to have to make some measure of sacrifice. But the sacrifice is smaller than they'll make it out to be. Because I'm not saying that we instantly bring all that back to the United States. I'm saying that we leave China. So South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, India, Thailand, Vietnam, Australia, Brazil, Western Europe. That all plays a role, actually, in decoupling from China. And it's not just about instantly onshoring to the US, though I like that plenty. Realistically, I'm going to keep my eye on what the ball is here from a foreign policy objective. It's not nearly as difficult as they make it out to be if we have the modern version of, NATO is less relevant today than actually the same thing around the Pacific Rim, and then bring it around to Brazil and other parts of the world. We can actually do this. We go to Xi Jinping with that strong hand. You put me in a position to sit across the table. He will know that I mean it. And then they're actually going to cave. We avoid ever having to go with war with China because we defeat them economically to make sure we never have to militarily. That's how it's done, but it's going to require some fortitude. That's what we're missing. We can regain our fortitude, but to be strong, you have to be self-confident. To be self-confident as a nation, we have to be self-confident in ourselves as individuals. And that's why I'm talking about a cultural campaign. Courage is contagious because you have self-confidence when you know what it's like to be courageous. That's what it takes all the way from the level of the individual, every American, all the way up to the level of our nation. That's what we're going to deliver. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're
Yeah, thank you, man.
civil service thing
Thank you.
reminded me of your interview with Decouple, so you kind of know what kind of voter I am. I think the solution to that, and feedback to you, because you're a very thoughtful person, is that we need to put trade stuff back into our schools. Electricians, nurses, things like that, and give these kids an experience to be able to, 16 to 18, they do an internship, they're serving their community, they're learning a skill, they're not being funneled into the college system and saddled with debt and indoctrinated. And I think you probably get a good response to that other than bumping it up to 25.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, there's no silver bullets here, right? So that's for civic pride, but also part of the pride you derive is by actually creating something in the world, perhaps even with your own hands that you're proud of. And this is on a first personal note, right? I studied molecular biology. I went to law school. I built a biotech company. It's a multi-billion-dollar company today. Great. That's my path to living the American dream. Here.
You got some more. There we go.
Got it. The chair's right behind you. We got you. We got you.
So, hey, Judy, right here, baby girl. Right here.
Good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We're going to go inside, okay? Cool off. You and me sit down in there.
Cold, nice cold water.
How's that sound? Ooh, yeah.
That the future president of the United States gives you water.
She seems like she's doing okay. How are you doing? Take your time. Take your time.
Let me have your sign for just a second.
Oh, sure.
Here we go.
Yeah, give her some shade.
Can I hold your phone for you? You got it?
Yeah, I do.
Good hands
I
over
got
here
your
to
head,
cover.
baby girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good attention, everybody.
Yeah, and you got Dr. Dunn right here behind you.
Johnny.
You can't see him. He's in
Everybody.
camouflage.
Yeah.
But he's here.
Stealth.
That's good?
He's stealth.
All right, let's go inside?
Another.
Can you think you can walk with me? Okay, one more sip. You good? All right, Jamie and Dr. Dunn are gonna get you, okay? Oh, I'm sorry, Jess. I'm sorry. I'm in shock, okay? I know, really. You
doing
got
all right?
it?
You doing all right there?
I got the door, guys.
Yeah, I think so.
Can you
I
maybe?
just started feeling the woods.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
well, it's
good.
hot
Sometimes
out.
get some water in you. Yeah.
This whole politics makes me feel woozy too.
Yeah, I know. It's exactly. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for
She
being
with
here.
you?
No.
Okay.
Right right here, Judy.
We're gonna put you on the couch.
Thank you.
We're gonna unbutton that hot, sweaty jacket.
Okay, that's
Take
great.
those school shoes off. You
Oh, it's
look
nice and
good.
cool in here.
Yes, feels good.
You
Feels
look
I like
good.
that. I like that. No,
It's too hot.
you with her?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we all are.
Okay,
We are.
good,
Yes,
good, good,
yes.
good, good. Make sure she's doing well.
All right.
She's doing well. She's doing well. Thank you. A little bit of sunshine, so no, she's doing all right. Everybody else, drink your water. Thank you. She's okay. I'm happy to see that. I'll pick up where I left off with your question, sir. It was a good one. So I think that sense of pride, I think, is something that we can get to in multiple ways. It's not just by passing a civics exam. You're right. But the reason I was telling you my story and my path in this country was that my path leads to success for people, leads to respect. That can't be the only path. My path cannot be the only path in America. And I think that's part of the problem. I'll be really honest with you guys, actually. I was very academic growing up, graduated top of my class, all these things. I'm actually not a person who is particularly great at building things with my hands. Right? I took a carpentry class actually in high school. That was the one I did the worst in. Okay? I did okay in my other ones. But if I was just to turn the tables and say that that was the only path to get ahead in this country, to have dignity, to have respect, to live the American dream, maybe I'd be sitting in my parents' basement playing video games and smoking marijuana or whatever many children across this country, young people across this country are doing. I think it's shameful that we've only created one possible path that runs through four-year college education to get ahead. Big part of the problem, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, was the Department of Education. They actually subsidize a four-year gender studies major in God knows where, but doesn't do a thing to actually help somebody who wants to be a welder or a mechanic or a carpenter or a plumber. No, they tilt the scales. You get what you pay for. And guess what? At the level of our country, wonder why it's hard to find a welder or a mechanic or a carpenter or a plumber. It's because you get what you pay for. And so I think that's one of the things that we need to embrace and restore. And I'm not doing it in some kind of knee-jerk, check the box kind of way. A four-year college education can be a good thing for some people. It was for me, actually. But that doesn't mean that's the right path for everybody. And we have to have paths to dignity and respect and advancement in this country, partly because we just require it. We have a skill set shortage in this country. We have a worker shortage. That's also part of how we address it. So there is no silver bullet. The civic service idea and the constitutional civic knowledge idea, that's not a silver bullet. There's no such thing as one. Neither is fixing four-year college education, but it's all part of what it's going to take to piece together this revival. And I thank you for sharing it. You're right. I don't, it's probably the first time on the campaign trail, 9 weeks in, that I've talked about that. Because you asked about it. But it's part of why it's baked in to my reason for wanting to shut down the Department of Education, and you just smoked that out. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's a great question.
Good afternoon. Thanks for coming. I'm kind of embarrassed about asking this question. We have a former president of this country whose qualification to be president is still questionable, whether he's a natural-born citizen. The vice president we currently have is also questionable whether she can hold that position. I've heard you say that your parents emigrated to this country and that you were born here. Are you a natural-born citizen in that qualification to hold the office of president?
I am. And I have a deep understanding of the Constitution. But part of why I'm running. I want to eliminate that fourth branch of government because it's not in the Constitution. Okay? I believe in the privileges and immunities of citizenship. First part of the 14th Amendment. Tell you a little funny fact about that example that I gave you about that civics test and about the idea of potentially service for young people to be able to vote. Not a lot of people know this. There's no guaranteed right to vote in the Constitution. People forget that. You can't discriminate based on race or gender. But there's no constitutionally guaranteed right to vote. So my understanding of the Constitution is bone deep. Okay, I'm running to revive the ideals enshrined in that Constitution. my commitments to the Second Amendment. For example, I spoke to the NRA about this 2 weeks ago. Come not from the fact that I'm some cheesy politician posing with some rifle to check some box. I'm not going to pretend to be something like I'm not. I've gone sports shooting more times, less times I can count on two hands. But I'm doing it because I know it's the amendment that secures all of the others. But it is that understanding of the Constitution that tells me that the same way George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or anybody else, their parents came to this country or were of a generation that came to this country in the same way that my parents did legally. Born in this country, American through and through. And that's why I'm running for the president to actually revive that. I thank you for asking that question. You don't need to be embarrassed about asking any question. In fact, too many people are embarrassed to be able to say in public what they'll say quietly in private. So I thank you for saying openly what you might say behind closed doors. You want to know the best measure of the health of any democracy, especially this constitutional republic. That's what we are. It's the percentage of people who feel free to say what they actually think in public. It's not the number of ballots cast every November. That's just the little final act at the end of the process. It's, do you feel free to express yourself? That's the litmus test. You want to know how well America's doing. Right now, we're not doing well. But I think we can do better again. It's just going to take more of us to start talking openly again. And I'm grateful to you. I'll give you my constitutionally grounded answer. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Welcome to South Carolina. Seeing as where we are, I wanted to know what your position was on the Dobbs decision and the ensuing legislation in all the states, both ways, and what is your position on life?
So I'm unapologetically pro-life. I picked that up when I went to Catholic schools in 9th through 12th grade, and I was persuaded of it. Right? It wasn't an issue that my parents happened to be pro-life, but it wasn't the kind of issue that came up in our household before 8th grade. I was persuaded into it, and it's stuck with me ever since. Here's where I am on the issue in terms of how we can actually move the ball forward in our country. I think more people are pro-life in America than who will actually admit it openly, even to themselves. And here's how we know. Clarence Thomas actually, in the Dobbs case, brought up a great example of a woman, pregnant woman, assaulted by a criminal. The unborn child dies in the process. I don't think there's a person in America who believes in their heart of heart that that person walks free without any criminal liability. I don't think anybody actually believes that. What does that tell you? This is an issue about life. Okay, everyone agrees on it. Now they trick themselves into thinking that they don't because they turn it into women's rights. And so that puts the ball back in our court. That actually relates to where we are today, actually. Carolina Pregnancy Center. We have to walk the walk when it comes to being pro-life. We can't just say the words. We have to say that we will make it easier for women. We are committed to putting in the hard work. Alexa, you do that. You embody that example for our country to actually not just say pro-life. That's the easy part for someone in my shoes to do. The hard part is what you do to actually get women to that place of saying, yes, let's talk about adoption as an option. Let's educate people on what it means to bring a child into this world. Let's talk about child care. Drawing from Social Security in the future, I think there's room for a conversation about even borrowing from your own account in the future. Bring that into the present. I think there's a room for conversation about greater sexual responsibility for men in this country. Okay, we have paternity tests. Genetic, hardwired, confirmed paternity tests put more responsibility on men. I will be an advocate for that. I think people on the left like it when I say that. I actually faced off with Chuck Todd about this issue. I'll actually about to meet the press back with him tomorrow. I think it's important, by the way, that we have presidential candidates in our party that will say, I will go to Don Lemon's set or Chuck Todd's set, where I'll be in Washington, D.C. tomorrow, debate them on their turf, not because it's fair, because it's not, but still come with the ideas that allow us to win. That's when he pushed me on abortion. I took him there. He didn't know what to say. Well, I do think men should have more responsibility. Great, well, let's talk about that. So then let's actually have more of us say, this isn't a women's rights issue. It is a human rights issue. And that's the way we need to view this. And then, you know what? It doesn't have to be this divisive issue that it's made out to be. The women's rights sideshow that we've created distracted us from seeing that this is an issue of life. And the two questions I think bring the country along is, one is, Do you think that that criminal walks free when he causes the death of an unborn child of a pregnant mother? If not, you're with us. And then we're with you when we say we will actually do the work to help women get to the right answer, not just by putting that burden on women, but by sharing it as all of us together. That's what it actually means to walk the walk when it comes to being pro-life. And that is the way I'll lead our movement on this issue without compromising on our principles. It's not splitting the baby, right? As they say, no, we will not compromise on that principle. We will stand firm on it and unite the country in the process. Thank you.
What's your position on America's involvement with the United Nations and the ability of the United Nations to enact treaties that subvert Americans' constitutional process?
First thing we need to do is stop funding institutions that hate us. The WHO, for example, is fundamentally anti-American, and yet we're their biggest funder. Interesting how that works. Now, the UN is an institution that has outlived its purpose. However, I think that, as my gut instinct would like to say, let's get the heck out of there, I think that would actually put us in a weaker spot now, given that it exists, with Russia and China at the table with the five-member Security Council. So as much as I'd like to say it, I'm not just going to say the things that I impulsively want to say. I think in running the country, if we're actually representing American interests, I would have done it very differently in getting to where we are, but we are where we are. I don't think we can pull out, but we can use the power of the purse to get these multilateral international institutions back in line, because their bread is buttered with us. And we have to stop funding our own enemies to use that money back against us. That's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you for your courage. Vivek, there are a lot of us here who served our country, and we're kind of disappointed at the condition of the military these days. We are kind of weary of war incorporated, squandering treasure and blood, and we're kind of weary of the military becoming a sociological experiment. What is your view of the role of the military going forward?
Thank you, and thank you for your service. You've served in which part of the military?
United States Navy.
Thank you for your service, sir. I appreciate that. So it's like any institution. You've got to have a sense of mission. And when that mission goes away, that leaves room for bureaucratic rot to fester. Okay? So I think the top job of the U.S. military is to protect Americans on American soil. Period. Okay, so that is why I say I can do this without asking Congress for permission. I intend to do it without asking for forgiveness. We will use our own military to secure our own border instead of using it to secure somebody else's. We will use our own military to end the fentanyl crisis that kills 50 times the number of people who died on 9/11 each year, because that is what it means to protect Americans on American soil. Shockingly, those two ideas alone are very controversial in the defense establishment as it exists today. So when we've lost our sense of purpose, it's almost because that actually works to the advantage of the people who actually sit in the seats of power. Most people who serve in the military want to serve this country, but there's a 10% layer that sits at the Pentagon that actually wants to make sure they wield the keys to power. It's not partisan, it's the managerial class. Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter. They want to have the ability to use that power to advance their own ends. And they're just using now the rise of wokeism in the military. It's like the equivalent of blowing woke smoke to deflect accountability from the left, actually, which used to come after the military for its overreach. Remember, in the Bush era, it was actually the left that pushed back against, more than the right, against wars in Iraq and other places where we, in retrospect, now know we should not have engaged in the way we did. Loss of life that would have been avoidable. The left came after him, so they said, okay, here's the deal. I'm General Milley, okay. We'll talk about white rage. Now I get to still do Iraq next time I feel like it, right? That's the trade that they effectively made. So they defanged the left by saying that we're going to engage in the same self-hatred of America. If that's what you really want us to teach, we'll do it for you. But for them, it's about power, dominion, control, and if necessary, punishment. And I think part of the role of the commander-in-chief, where the commander-in-chief has fallen short, is giving that military a sense of purpose. Because once you have that mission-aligned purpose, then everybody who serves, all the way up, including the ranks of the Pentagon, has to serve that purpose or find their way out. I will articulate that purpose, and then for the General Millys of the world, I will help them, direct them to the front door and close the door on their way out as well. That's the way you actually reform a culture of an institution that has lost its way, but is necessary to actually serve our own interests. And I think you bring civic lifeblood of young children who actually, 18 years old and older, who then feel inspired to actually serve a country that they can be proud of rather than they hate. That's how we revive not just the military, but our civic lifeblood itself. Thank you for that question. Appreciate it. Right here. I got you 2 questions here. We'll come back to you.
Hello, Vivek. I'm glad to see you here. The southern border. When Kamala Harris wanted to find the root cause, wouldn't that have been Washington, D.C.? And what do we do about, I mean, everybody understands that, yes, we are a nation built on immigrants. Absolutely. People that got here legally. Now, we have no problem with that. How do we address the people that have gotten here, infiltrated this country, and is there any way to remove them? And what can we do to encourage Mexico to reinforce their southern border? How do they get all the way through? I mean, I know the cartels have...
Cartels are a big problem in Mexico.
That's it.
So I'll be very specific and quick. I know it's getting warm here. You all have been... Thank you for sticking this out and being as patient. I want to make sure our friend inside is doing okay before we wrap up as well. So I'll take 2 more questions and then we'll call it a day. Answering your question, I'll go quick. Okay? Use our military to secure the border. Building the wall is insufficient. We have enough. The numbers are easy. Okay, we actually have undeployed troops in 40,000 sitting in Germany doing God knows what. We have the manpower to do it. We can actually secure the border. The question is, do we have the will to do it? I think we do. Do we have the leader to do it? Now we don't. I think if you put me in there, we will. So that's the first answer. Second answer is actually Mexico's on the southern border. You're not supposed to say this way, but it's just true. Mexico has lost its sovereignty. It's not really a sovereign nation. It's co-sovereign with the drug cartels. I'll call up the next Mexican president. There's a Mexican election in 2024, just like in our country. Whoever it is, call him up, say, listen up. Drug cartels are your sugar daddy. There's a new daddy in town. We will help you for a tiny fraction of what we spent in Ukraine. We will help you solve your problem. If you don't, we're going to come in and do it for you. Solve that problem, annihilate the drug cartels one way or another. That's how you end the fentanyl crisis. And then we have the leftover problem internally in this country. I think it's important that we see it with clear eyes rather than vengeance and grievance. Okay. Many of those people who came to this country, I don't blame them. I like your name, Kamala Harris, Biden, and the agenda that actually winked and nodded to these people, signaling to them that it was perfectly legal for them to come, kind of. Are you really breaking the law if a police officer to the Capitol lets you in? Are you really breaking the law if the President of the United States, who's supposed to secure the border, basically tells you the front door is open? That's complicated. However, here's where I come down. We're a nation built on the rule of law. We have to stand by that. Amnesty is not an option. We have to send people back as humanely and compassionately as we can. But for people who made a demonstrated commitment to this country, provide them back a legal path to get back in under that rule of law. That's how we handle it, and that's what I'll do. Thank you.
Going back to an earlier question that you answered with the using the military to seal our borders, how was that affected by the Posse Comitatus?
Great question. So this is a specific question about a post-Civil War doctrine in this country saying that you can't use the military to fulfill domestic functions, including law enforcement. So military is in the national security bucket, law enforcement is in the domestic police state bucket. And after the Civil War and after Reconstruction, this was a way of preventing misuse of the military going forward as one nation. So great question. So I think that just because something has gotten classified under federal law enforcement, and the immigration laws are federal laws, doesn't mean that it falls outside the realm of national security. So part of the legal doctrines where I think the DOJ is messed up is thinking that something has to be in one category or the other. There are certain things, like the fentanyl crisis and the southern border crisis, that both relate to national security interests and relate to enforcement of the federal law. So just because it falls under the domain of the FBI does not mean at the level of the border, which is the outer edge of our country, that we can't actually use the military to actually secure us against a national security threat. I think that the fentanyl crisis is the product of a Chinese opium war intentionally grounded to undermine the US from within. So I don't favor putting the military in sanctuary cities or participating in that deportation process, because that to me would be a violation of posse comitatus. However, putting the military on, as I said, on the border, and on the Mexican side of that border, providing the aid to the Mexican government or else doing it on our own to annihilate the drug cartels, I think is a perfectly legitimate use and legally and ethically and morally justified use of military force. But we've got to, as you suggest, keep those first principles in mind to make sure that we don't become the very thing that we're protecting ourselves against. So thank you for that question. I like this audience, very principled audience. Okay, that's what we need to reground ourselves in, is the first principles themselves. Not just go through the motions, not just argue about the who. You know, Donald Trump or somebody else, Kevin McCarthy or somebody else, Ronna McDaniel or somebody else, boring Republican Party questions. The what and the why. What do we stand for? Why do we stand for it? Revive that, the path to our national revival goes. We have to have the host's final privilege here. Did you have a question?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say you could have been anywhere today when you came to Spartanburg, but you came here. And I love taking you on the tour to hear your heart for America and for the unborn. And then I've loved hearing your intellect. You are incredibly intelligent and incredibly gifted. So we are so proud and so honored that you would come to Carolina Pregnancy Center and to Spartanburg today. And we just wish you well as you take your vision across this country. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Alexa, that means a lot to me. Thank you. Well, you guys touched me here, and I'll just say, let's make this country the place that it was for me. Let's make it so for the next generation. That you can get ahead, for these kids can get ahead, my son can get ahead, no matter your skin color, no matter where your parents came from. You get ahead in this country based on your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication. You're free to speak your mind at every step of the way. That is the American dream. That is the new American dream. That is what we're going to revive. Thank you all. God bless you. God bless your families. God bless our great country. And I thank you for this warm welcome. You put me in that job. I will not let you down. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Let's do it.